Welcome to Breakthrough Success. I am your host, Marc Guberti, CEO and founder of Content Marketing Plaza, bringing you 3 new episodes each week where I and top-level guests teach you how to take your business to the next level and achieve your breakthrough. And one part of having a successful business is having an effective funnel in place. So if you are someone looking to create a funnel, that is something that I do for people. I do that for free for some people also if you don't have a ClickFunnels account yet. So if you want more info on that, just contact me. That link will be in the show notes. But what we're going to cover in this specific episode is vulnerability, because vulnerability is a topic where if we harness it to its full potential, we can really become the hero that our audience looks up to. So there's a lot of power in vulnerability. However, some people also get it confused with the victim mentality. So we'll clear out some of that stuff. We'll show you how to use vulnerability in a way that helps you to grow your business. The guest who will be joining us for this episode today, he has spent 12 years helping business leaders use storytelling to transform themselves and their organizations. He pioneered the business comic book, packaging and publishing dozens of titles, including bestsellers by Tony Hsieh, Marshall Goldsmith, and Robert Cialdini. Prior to starting RTC in 2005, he was a professional actor in Los Angeles, starring in one of the 50 greatest Super Bowl commercials of all time. He is an avid sponsor of Conscious Capitalism and Social Venture Network, a member of the Young Entrepreneur Council, and a contributor to the Small Giants community. Today's guest for episode 331 of Breakthrough Success is none other than Corey Blake. Corey, it is such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you, Mark. Loving your energy, man. Rock and roll.
Corey, I'm so happy to have you on the Breakthrough Success podcast. Definitely looking forward to this because vulnerability, I feel like that is a topic that some people, it's a little bit of a sensitive topic because do you want to share those stories or not? I feel like it can help a lot of people if you do. So we will talk about that. Beforehand, can you first share a little bit on why you decided to help business leaders and what got you started on that journey?
Oh, I'd love to. Thank you. It certainly was not my intended trajectory. I never took a business course until I was in my 40s. I was a theater major, so I come from a performance background. But early in my life, I had a pretty pivotal moment that set me up to intersect down the road in the way that I have. And I'll start just by opening up from a place of vulnerability. So I grew up in a Jewish household with a Jewish mom who poured a tremendous amount of her light into me, right? I believed that the world revolved around me. That's just the way it made sense because that's the way she positioned it. So when I was 5 years old, though, my mother hit a patch of very severe depression, and she was institutionalized for a period of time. Her light went out for about a year, right? And so while it came on after she found the right mix of medication a year later, like brighter than ever, that year of my life, I felt like I was in the dark. And I did not know how to exist in the dark. The darkness made no sense to me. I didn't know who I was in the dark, right? At the same time, that period of a year was the birth of what eventually became my gift that I now offer to businesses and thought leaders, et cetera. And that is that back then I had to learn how to read the energy of a room to know if I was safe or not, right? The person who had been the safest in my life, my mom, became the most dangerous. She could go off at the drop of a hat. My 5th birthday party, actually, in my memory, the kickoff to her depression, she had brought home this cherry-covered cheesecake, and I didn't like cherries. I had never done anything wrong to that point in my life. I didn't know I could do anything wrong, so I just was honest. I was like, I don't like cherries. And I saw my mother freak out to the point of like slamming my bedroom door over and over and over again while she screamed at me about being ungrateful. Like, totally caught me by surprise, right? But that gift that kind of manifested to keep me safe, which was reading that energy in the room, right? Hearing the footsteps across the house and knowing mom's mood as a result, like, right, just being so in touch. That is now what I bring to others. It was also the birth of the performer in me, because if mom was happy and laughing, there was a much greater chance that I was going to, like, life was going to be easier and better, right? Ultimately, the gift that I say I am able to give now is that I have the ability to recognize what is special in other people, because that's what my mother intuitively did for me. And I know what it is to be special, and I know what it is to be invisible or to feel like nothing in that darkness, right? So now that's the spectrum that I play in and working with businesses. How do we recognize and honor the essence of that organization that is beautiful, right? That is well-intended and that is trying to serve the world. And then how do we magnify that to the world to some degree through performance so that the world can experience it and see it, and people can know immediately either, oh my God, where has this business been all my life? I need them so badly, or that makes me so uncomfortable, I just want to run the frick in the other direction. And I think both of those are immensely valuable.
And I think an interesting thing to get from Corey's backstory is how he's just talking about these different things that happen. He's not really playing victim at all. He's just telling them as it happened. And I think that one of the things against being vulnerable is that it kind of plays like victim. So I know there's definitely a difference between the two. So I'm wondering if you could dispel that for us a little bit.
I love it. Thank you. So there's a work by a gentleman named David Emerald that I admire tremendously, and it helped me with this reframe that you're talking about. He wrote a book called The Empowerment Dynamic, The Power of TED, which is the empowerment dynamic. And in The Power of TED, he highlights that there is a victim triangle. There's a triangle where we play victim or persecutor or rescuer, right? If you're the victim, someone's persecuting. That might be me. And a victim is to be rescued, right? So it sets up this dynamic where we get into, he calls it the drama triangle, right? Now, alternatively, there's another option, and it's the empowerment dynamic where the points of the triangle are the creator, the challenger, and the coach, right? So when I notice that I'm being a victim and I'm making you the persecutor and I'm asking someone to rescue me, by being aware of that, I can say, okay, if I wasn't a victim and I was a creator, how might I meet this situation? Or if I wasn't persecuting the other person, what would that do? What I find so fascinating about this is so many of us are natural rescuers, right? There's something, like you even mentioned at the beginning about being the hero, right? There's something fascinating that happens when we make ourselves the hero. Someone else is made the victim, right? Because the victim has to be rescued. So I'm really attracted to the idea of our mutual victimizes anyone or puts anyone in that role where we actually diminish them by keeping them in that victim seat. I don't know. It's a fascinating conversation to me, but I appreciate the reframe. And for people who are interested in a little more, David Emerald wrote this wonderful parable. It's like an hour read, and it's brilliant. The empowerment, the power of TED, the empowerment dynamic.
Yeah, it's certainly a very interesting dynamic. And those two differences also where, I mean, if you really dig deep into which one you are now, you could definitely change that narrative. So you're able to use something like a vulnerable experience as a way to empower people. And I'm wondering, what do you see as the power of vulnerability from a business standpoint? Because I think a lot of people in a personal standpoint, it's like just a release, like get it out. But how can we translate that more from a business standpoint?
There are a number of ways. So we approach all of this from the angle of storytelling. That's the lens through which I see the world and we see the world. There's this aspect of wholeness that I think is that vulnerability is the pathway to. So at an individual level, if I am hiding parts of myself that I judge or that I shame or that I feel shame around, right? If I'm hiding those because I'm afraid that you'll reject me if you see them, then in hiding those, I'm only showing a portion of myself to the world, right? Now, it is my whole self, including both my light and my shadow, that is my most powerful self. So if I'm not being my most powerful self, what am I not bringing into my career or the work that I'm doing in the world? Organizationally, the same thing occurs. Organizationally, when a group of human beings come together, if we all pretend that we don't have shadow sides, right, and we all just share with each other how we're all awesome, then we tend to show only one dimension of ourselves or our organization to the world. And if there's anything, my impression is if there's anything that social media has taught us, it's our bullshit detector is much higher than it ever used to be. And we can smell when someone's trying to get us to buy something or believe something or control us. We don't want to be controlled as human beings, right? So when I risk, for example, when I risk telling you that when I was 16 years old, I used to steal from the company that I worked for, and that I thought I was like, in retrospect, I don't feel bad about it. I feel clever for having been able to pull it off. I create an opportunity where you could say, oh, this guy, this is bad news.
Right.
I don't want to learn from this person. Alternatively, it creates the opportunity for you to say, why do I feel like I trust this guy more for having told me that? Right? So, but it's not intuitive. But organizationally or individually, when we invite people into the things we are less proud of, we release ourselves from the judgment that we have. And the key is we also release the judgment we have for other people. It makes us kinder to the world, which at an individual and organizational level tends to mean more business.
Yeah, and if you do release that and you do have that kind of mentality, I do feel like good things happen to good people. Like I like sometimes there's like a glitch in that, but overall, I'd say that is something that happens. So if we are able to have this release where we're able to empower ourselves, we could certainly empower others as well. But also being vulnerable, I think we talk a little bit on the like something about like polarity in the sense where you have like, I'll give you an example, like someone like Gary Vaynerchuk or Grant Cardone. I feel like you either really love those guys or you do not like them at all. So I think if you're able to be more vulnerable about different stuff like that, you're able to get a different crowd of people who really like what you're doing. That can certainly help your business as well.
I think it's huge, absolutely huge, because look, I'll share that only about 6-7 years ago, did we make the decision to move to transformational business only. We were letting go of any transactional business. It was not an easy move by any means, right? It's a very fear-based, like I didn't know if we were going to be able to replace our transactional business. And thankfully, like within 6 months, we had replaced it all. Like blew my mind, didn't expect that. But the advantage of putting a flag in the ground and saying, this is what I'm going to stand for, is that you become more visible to the people who need to see you. And you're right, you create more provocation. There is more polarity. But by giving people the opportunity to run in the opposite direction, you release yourself from all the effort that we go through trying to make things fit that just don't fit. You know, before 6-7 years ago, when we were 80% transactional business, my people were spending the majority of their time pulling their hair out with relationships that weren't working. And only the 20% was invested into relationships that were awesome, right? Because they're just putting out fires with unhappy clients who weren't the right fit in the first place. So when we scare those people away, and we're not saying we're better than those people, we're just saying we're different. They belong in another sandbox where they'll be served better. When they go there and we attract more of our people, man, like productivity shoots through the roof, and there's way less dealing with problems and more of kind of coming together to address challenges that we have. It's such a different mentality.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And a lot of people think that, you have to, like, your audience is everybody. But if you try to make your audience of everybody, like, it's not like someone says, like, to Gary Grant or whoever, like, I don't like your content, and then they change up their content for that one person. Because once you figure out what audience you serve, you just got to stick with that audience. The people who you're not able to serve based on what your brand stands for, someone else is going to be able to serve them. So you're better off serving all the people who you can as well as you can.
I think that we're in this interesting space where companies are just starting to wake up to the fact that people care about who they do business with. So there are entire industries where none of the major players have figured out how to do that yet. And so we have to buy from one of them. So we have to, right? So we're not necessarily buying because we like that company or feel in alignment with them. Like, if you just think about your internet provider, there really are still no great options in certain industries. Your cable provider, like, it's still a struggle. Like, I hate them all, but I got to do business with one of them. So, but there are so many industries where people are waking up to this, and leaders are realizing this is a differentiator, and we can actually help people see our company, and that's creating more awareness. And hopefully eventually some of these bigger corporations will come along and figure out how do they show up in a way that's more authentic and be willing to not be the right choice for everyone. It's not easy, and the bigger organizations get, the more challenging it becomes, because it's just naturally there's a lot of fear when there's a lot more to lose.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's a really, that fear of loss certainly plays a big role in decisions and just the way we approach things. Like a fear of loss creates more of a reaction than the potential gain. And going back to the vulnerability side a little bit, we've talked about, victim versus vulnerability differences there, and all the different ways we can use vulnerability to, move ourselves to the next level, whether it's personal or for our business. But for some people, they just don't want to be vulnerable. I mean, you've shared like stories with us that maybe you've shared them a few times, maybe to some people that's like a bigger thing than other people, because some people, like, they hear your story and they're like, oh my gosh, I could relate to all of that. Other people, like, different, they may not be able to relate as much. That's just that natural, the polarity. So the point is that some people, they're not necessarily comfortable with getting out there and saying, different things that happened, as Corey's been able to do throughout our conversation. So how can we get more comfortable with being vulnerable and saying the things that maybe they're in our mind, like they just keep playing again and again?
So I think this is a really important question, because I do believe that that we do have to be careful in this arena, right? Because if we're not intentional with how we start being vulnerable, we can create some serious scar tissue that takes us another decade to get over if we ever do. So I appreciate the question. There is a pathway that we've uncovered through the book writing process that we do in our organization. We came to recognize there's actually this kind of pushing in system of creating more confidence and more safety so that we can push our edges around vulnerability. And the way that it works is that it's a practice like many others. So I think of it very much like going to the gym, right? Initially, we want to find one person that we feel safest with to practice a certain piece of vulnerable sharing. And typically then what happens is we share. And we can talk about how we set up the situation to be successful. We'll come back to that. But typically when we share, if it goes well, right, there's this reaction. First off, there tends to be a reaction of, okay, you love me, you're my safe place, you have to be okay with this, right? So we kind of immediately dismiss that person's positive reaction. But what we then can do is concentrically go outwards one step to one person who's just a little bit less safe, and try sharing the same piece of vulnerability that was uncomfortable the first time. Chances are we're still within a safety zone. So as soon as that person responds positively, we'll probably dismiss that person too, right? Like the first person might have been my wife. You love me, you had to say that, right? Then I go to a good friend. You love me, you had to say that. Then third step out concentrically is to find someone a little bit less safe. It might be someone I work with. It might be someone just on the periphery that doesn't have to, right? And if it goes well that time, the third time, there's just something internally that starts changing, where I recognize that this is not as big of a deal as I'm making it, and that it is actually, people are really appreciative when I share it, and we get closer. It also helps me to hone in exactly how I share what I'm sharing, so that as I continue to do it, I'm more comfortable with what I'm sharing. The first time it might be really clumsy and messy, and the person might have a hard time understanding it. The second time it's a little bit more clear, right? So concentrically moving outwards like that, there comes a point where most people say, I'm fine, just tell the world. I'm totally cool with it, right? But if you start there, you really, that's a dangerous place. So it's really important you go concentrically. The alternative to taking the same piece of vulnerability, right, and sharing it, like a metaphor of the gym. You can do a heavier, reps, or you can do more frequent reps. So one way to practice is to take the same vulnerability and share it in less safe places. Another practice is to go to the same place but share something even more vulnerable. And both of those, I think, are a great way. If you're mastering both of those, eventually you get to a place where vulnerability just becomes relatively, I wouldn't say it's easy, because it's still, it's not vulnerable unless there's an inherent risk.
Right.
So it's not that it's not risky, but there's a certain level of comfort in letting people have their reaction. And if it's upsetting to people or they dislike me as a result, over time that becomes way easier. In the beginning, I cared very much that everyone be okay with what I was sharing. And just through practice, eventually, the polarization that you talk about, it actually became something I'm proud of now, right? And it's not because who don't want to have anything to do with me. There's not a judgment that they're not getting it or they're not as evolved as me or this or that or anything. It's just like, look, this thing has been this amuse-bouche. We taste it, a little foodie reference. We taste it, and we either love it or we want to spit it out. But we know right away, and then, man, there's so much we can do with those who we are really on the same page with.
Yeah, and I really like that idea where, you're just practicing it first. I mean, it's just like, people who are afraid of public speaking. You practice with like a friend first, and then you build up so that eventually you're able to speak in front of that audience and speak in front of, in this case, more people about the vulnerability that maybe you've had for a while. I think they're definitely really great to talk about, especially if this is something that it's been in your heart for a while. It's something that you just want to get out. So I'm wondering if you could share with us, what do you believe holds most people back from really being able to get out and be vulnerable? Would you say it's that fear of what others will think, or is it a little more than that?
I think it is. I think it's not a trick question. I just think it's fear of rejection, right? Rejection is just not comfortable. Fear of judgment. We all judge ourselves pretty harshly. That's a human thing that we do, right? So we kind of feel like we get enough. So the idea of outward, judgment coming towards us when it's manifested by us plenty, there's an aversion to that, and I think that's a very natural human instinct. The unfortunate reality is that instinct prevents us from closer connections and more opportunity in life. And so we have to kind of get ourselves out of that default and be intentional about trying and practicing vulnerability so that there is more connection that's available.
Yeah, and that's a really great point also. We're already judging ourselves pretty hard, and we just have to, there is going to be some judgment that comes our way. If you're doing something like sharing something that you're vulnerable about or doing exciting things, there's going to be judgment coming at you from other people. So that is something that we have to condition ourselves to, and not try to be perfect in the sense where we get no judgment, but, just acknowledge that it's going to happen at some point. Not everyone's going to be rubbed the right way by you being vulnerable, but you are going to get that polarity effect where some people just rave about your story. So definitely something to think about for people who are a little on the fence with sharing their vulnerability. One thing that I do want to ask also is that, one of the things I believe is that our habits are essential. They truly make us who we are. So I'm wondering, Corey, if you could share with us some of the habits that you would consider essential for your success.
So I practice presence, right? And I think that is a practice. How do I, it's one of the things that when I mentioned, there's a great setup for a successful vulnerable experience. The key request is, before I share something vulnerable, is to ask, do you have the ability to be present with me right now? Because I'm going to share something, and if you're distracted, this is not going to go well. So it's okay. It's okay if you're not able to be present right now. We can set up a time when you are. But rather than just bombarding someone with a vulnerability, right? We want to set up the situation to be successful. Presence is something that we cultivate. There is determining how do we limit distraction, right? If you and I are in a conversation and we want to create a space for more vulnerability, right? And you're trying to share with me, and I've got this thing in front of my face, and I'm like, oh, just hold on a second, someone's trying to call me, right? That is a very we get it, right? There's an experience that's attached to that feels really crappy, and so part of the practice of presence is moving this thing far enough away that it's not a leash. It doesn't demand my attention. I go to it when I am ready, and therefore I shut it off. So determining what are the ways in which I can continue to cultivate the habit of presence and being truly with whoever I am with in the moment. Another habit that I try to do is to lose agenda. This is good and juicy and often tough, right? To lose the need for a specific outcome and just be in the moment without agenda. And part of that is simply the practice, the habit, is to be aware of when I have a want, right? Because someone who, as I mentioned earlier, my gift is that I can see what's special in other people, which means that if I am outcome driven, I can become manipulative. If there's something I want, I can use that ability to see what's special in you to try and get it. And that is not using my superpower for good, right? And I may justify why it's good, it's got great intent, but it's not good, right? So being aware of that aspect of presence and ensuring that I'm paying attention to my own behavior is a habit that I cultivate and believe in and highly recommend for business folks. That being able to be in a moment with other people is a huge relationship builder and a key component, certainly for any leader.
Yeah, and I really like how you mentioned that idea of being present because, I mean, as you mentioned, so many people they're on their phones like, oh, let me just see this text that I got, and then they're not really paying attention to you. So that idea of being present, it may not be the thing that, like it's not like, grow on social media or something like that, but it is something that is so essential because at the end, business and life in general, it boils down to the relationships you have. And if you're spending your relationship, like looking at a phone while the other person's talking, those relationships aren't going to go well in business and also in life. So certainly something to think about for everyone. That's a really great habit for us to have. Another habit is to read books, and I think this one is like self-education is really valuable. So I'm wondering if you could share with us, what do you believe is one book that would have a positive impact on us?
Sure. One of my favorites is a book called Necessary Endings. And closure is, I'll share it this way, closure is something that as human beings we're not really taught how to do well, right? That's why we often find in our relationships that when things aren't going well, we have a greater tendency to throw a grenade on it, right, than we do to close it with kindness, because anger is easier than grief, right? But the reality is that relationships are like seasons, and sometimes they come to an end. How to deal with that ending with gratitude, with kindness for ourselves and the other person in that relationship or the other organization in that relationship. What that does is it creates an opportunity for positive feelings all around to exist after the relationship ends, which also means there's an opportunity for a relationship down the road. You can also think of it, there are 4 seasons, but every year we come back to each one of them, right? So that book was really pivotal for me. I was certainly somebody who, when things weren't working out, I'm an intuitive blamer. That's my first place to go. And I would oftentimes blow things up. And the damage that created for myself internally, for how I treated myself as a result of that, all the self-talk that gets manifested out of anger and toxicity is just over the top. And then other people are going out in the world talking about what an ass I am because of the way that I'm behaving, because I believe I'm justified in behaving that way. So for that reason, I think it was a pivotal book that I came across in my life.
That's a very interesting book. I mean, it is good to think about relationships and not just, the good times, but think about the bad times and even that ending, because some of those endings, as the book title suggests, necessary endings. So we will throw that in the show notes, markguberti.com/E331. My book, Content Marketing Secrets, will be in there as well for anyone who is interested. And before we wrap up this episode, Corey, I've asked you a bunch of questions at our time together, but what do you believe is one question that we need to ask ourselves more often?
I'm going to ask this from a standpoint of what you do and what I do and the kind of intersection between the two. What is vulnerability? What role does vulnerability play in the funnel for our business? I think there is so much room for us to be creating an entry point and further depth towards intimacy through that content marketing, through that funnel for our business, so that the right people want to head to the bedroom and have a life transforming night with us and become raving fans forever as a result of that. That doesn't, you don't meet somebody and ask them to hop into the sack, right? There's a whole series of steps that have to occur, hopefully, typically, right? So I love the intersection of the two, and specifically for business people, I don't think folks are asking that question in a way that's benefiting their organization.
Yeah, that is definitely a good question for us to close on. Thank you for making that connection between both of our topics and for coming on Breakthrough Success and sharing all of the great insights for listeners who are wondering what are some good places where we can find you.
Sure. So for anyone who's looking for like, what is that superpower that is theirs? What is it, that thing that they're standing for in life? They can go to roundtablecompanies.com/purpose. I walk people through a 30-minute guided meditation and exercise that bypasses the intellectual approach most of us take to answering that question, and they will find the answer to it before they realize what we've done. It's kind of a little magic trick, but I love it so much. Super passionate about helping people to recognize what their gifts are. So they can find that roundtablecompanies.com/purpose. They can find me on Twitter at CoreyBlake9000. Find me on Instagram and reach out to me directly if they choose. Corey, Corey at roundtablecompanies.com.
Corey, thank you so much for sharing those resources with us and all the great insights. It was such a pleasure to have you on Breakthrough Success.
Thank you so much, Marc. I appreciate your questions. Awesome.